Asterisk before we even try to unpack the chaos that has been spreading like wildfire across every comment section, sports show, group chat, and fan debate. Let me ask you something that nobody seems willing to consider for even half a second. How did a single moment on the field, one snap, one decision, one sequence in a game filled with hundreds of moving parts, suddenly become this massive lightning bolt of controversy that everyone is treating like the beginning and end of everything? And why is the entire conversation being forced into this narrow tunnel, where people pretend that nothing else in the game mattered except that one isolated play? Because honestly, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes very clear that the way people are reacting has nothing to do with understanding football and everything to do with emotional overreaction, selective memory, and the desperate need to point a finger at someone they already decided to blame. And it's wild because when you really focus on what you're arguing about, right? Now it becomes obvious that the entire narrative has drifted so far away from reality that we're not even discussing the actual situation anymore. We're discussing a version of events that people invented in their heads. Because there is simply no way the entire meltdown of the game can be traced back to that one. 4th and 1 moment everyone is obsessing over. And yet here we are watching fans and analysts twist themselves into knots, trying to turn a single decision into a grand explanation for everything that went wrong on the field, even though football has never worked that way. And what makes it even more ridiculous is the way everyone keeps using his reaction as some kind of clue, as if looking at his face or the way he answers a question somehow reveals a secret conspiracy about the coaching staff. But in reality, he's just exhausted from being pulled into the same low-effort conversation over and over where people act like going for it on 4th down is a crime against humanity, when the truth is that aggressiveness is only hated when it fails and worshipped when it works. And if even one of those 4th and 1 attempts had succeeded, the same people who are screaming right now would be praising Kevin for being fearless, bold, confident, gutsy, and ready to take control of the game. But because it didn't work, suddenly the narrative flips into something toxic and shallow. And now everyone wants to pretend that the decision itself was reckless, stupid, and irresponsible. Even though the only difference between being a hero and being a villain in these moments is whether the ball crosses the line or not. And what makes this whole debate even more absurd is how people refuse to acknowledge the dozens of other moments that actually shaped the outcome. Missed assignments, blown coverages, miscommunications, frustration building on the sidelines, momentum shifts that nobody talks about, penalties that killed drives, defensive lapses that changed field position, and all the tiny details that stack up into the final score. Yet none of that gets mentioned because the easiest storyline is always the loudest one. And people love the illusion of simplicity because it gives them someone to blame without having to understand the complexity of the game. So now, instead of breaking down what really happened, we're trapped in this repetitive loop where everyone keeps parroting the same lazy argument, asking the same bait-loaded questions, twisting the context, ignoring the bigger picture, and acting like the entire collapse can be summarized in one sentence about being too aggressive. Even though the actual problems were spread all over the field from start to finish. And the more you look at the conversation, the more ridiculous it becomes because the argument. It's less to do with football strategy and more to do with emotion-driven outrage, where fans need someone to turn into the villain of the week because being angry at a single person feels easier than acknowledging the truth that a team's shortcomings are always the result of dozens of interconnected failures. And that's why when you look at his face, his tone, his body language, you can tell he's not frustrated about the decision being questioned. He's frustrated about the narrative being twisted beyond recognition. Because he knows exactly how these conversations go. Nobody actually wants nuance. Nobody actually wants analysis. They just want someone to blame so they can feel better about the disappointment. And that's why the entire debate feels like we're stuck in a loop that ignores context, ignores logic, ignores the actual breakdowns that happen throughout the game, and instead locks onto this single image, like it's some kind of symbol of everything wrong, even though deep down everyone knows it's just an easy excuse to fuel outrage. And honestly, the more this argument gets stretched, the less sense it makes. Because people keep pretending like this question, this oddly phrased, loaded, strangely targeted question is the key to unlocking the real story behind the loss, when the truth is that it's nothing more than a surface-level talking point being thrown around by people who didn't pay attention to the full game, didn't analyze the actual tape, didn't look at how momentum shifted, didn't consider how execution broke down, and didn't think about how many chances the team had to recover long before that moment even happened. And when you piece everything together, it becomes impossible to understand why the debate even exists. Because there is no world in which a single 4th and 1 defines an entire performance. Yet the obsession continues, as if repeating something wrong over and over will eventually make it right. And that's why this entire conversation feels so exhausting. Because instead of discussing real solutions, in real issues, we're stuck in a shallow echo chamber, where people argue just to argue without ever trying to understand the truth behind what actually took place on that field. And if that's not the clearest sign that the argument has lost all meaning, then I don't know what is. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.